deposited into a fund called the Greenhouse Gas Fund. That fund would then be used, after considering recommendations from the Solid Waste Management Board, to provide grants to localities for the purpose of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and combating the effects of climate change. These grants would create jobs in cities, counties, and towns across the Commonwealth and help localities along the Eastern Shore deal with the effects of the sea level rise. So I hope it's the will of the body to accept the legislation. And I have one line amendment that we submitted on line 100. After permitted, strike solid waste management facility and insert sanitary landfill. And I worked, actually got that suggestion from Dominion.
What line is it?
Line 100, sir.
Line 100, after permitted, strike solid waste management facility and insert sanitary landfill. Is there a motion on amendment? Motion second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The amendment is before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions of Delegate Lopez? Okay. Anyone in the audience like to speak in favor of House Bill 2391? Please come forward.
They're all too heavy for the pizza sticks.
Anyone in opposition, please?
They're all too heavy for the pizza sticks.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't eat any pizza, so I'll get a couple. I'm representing Waste Management and the Virginia Waste Industries Association, and the Delegate Lopez has been good enough to work with us on a couple of bills, and I told him no good deed goes unpunished. So we're here. That $4 tax, $4 a ton tax, isn't the first time we've seen issues like that flow through here. I was going to talk to you about the ramifications that has on contracts, existing contracts, on municipal governments. But I shared something with Delegate Lopez that just came to my attention today, and that is I think it can answer at least part of his problem. It didn't go get him the money once, at least not now, hopefully not anywhere in the foreseeable future. But the governor in September came forth with a bunch of proposals dealing with gas, the various forms of gas in the atmosphere. One of the proposals was directly looking at develop a framework for limiting methane leakage from natural gas infrastructure and landfills. And what he's done, or is in the process of doing under DEQ, says the Department of Environmental Quality will lead this effort, will establish a work group of environmental, academic, and business stakeholders, hopefully some of our people, within the next 120 days to support DEQ in its collection and evaluation of data to inform the regulation development process. So I think it gives Delegate Lopez part of what he wants. He doesn't get any money, but I could bring out all the contract information we have on that, but I don't think in light of the IR that you need to hear all that. So we're in opposition.
Anyone else in opposition like to come forward? Would David, would you mind to just discuss perhaps just what you guys are doing with methane or
Mr. Chairman, David Taylor, DEQ. The governor's directed us to evaluate, as you heard, potential regulations for methane from oil and gas and also from landfills. We're putting together a stakeholder group now that's probably going to start in March. We're going to focus on oil and gas, and sometime shortly after that we will have another stakeholder group to look at solid waste. So we'll deal with them separately, and we'll be making recommendations back to the administration on what some options might be for managing and regulating methane from those couple of sources.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Dr. Harris.
This committee helped me 3 or 4 years ago with a landfill in my area that was, we were having some emission problems, and I won't go into all of that. And we put, they put a system in that's burning off the gas to assist the community with what that was coming through. And I'd have to say I'm very pleased with how well that's worked, and I learned a lot with that. And I think that methane gas in these landfills is something that the governor has presented get worked on a lot in the state, and it could come to some good uses, but I don't see that, this bill is necessary at this time, given what I know about that.
I might add, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, right.
I've got several landfills in my area, and they're already capturing methane, and been doing it for years and years, and selling it. And, also, this would apply to all landfills, I understand, that all landfills don't generate methane gas.
Most,
Well, I know not all, so we'd have to be taxing some that didn't do it, maybe a few, I may not be a tremendous amount, but the rural areas are where a lot of landfills are located, and a lot of, governments, local governments, pay tipping fees or pay to use those landfills. That could be an increase in the cost to our localities. If the cost of running that landfill goes up based on, this bill, then it could also allow the cost of locality more to use.
well, I mean, Mr. Chairman,
No, go ahead.
if we're talking about, like actually millions of tons of waste coming in these landfills, a significant part from out of state, the fee would be charged to a large number of out-of-state, folks bringing waste into Virginia. And so, and if we allow for the administrative costs to be addressed, we're talking about millions of dollars, that we would be able to use in those communities where the landfills exist, or along the coast, to address some significant climate-related issues that we have to address, like recurrent flooding, like sea level rise. And we are searching for money to do that. And as the IPCC has said, and as all of these scientists around the world have said, you know, we're falling behind in addressing the needs of climate change. And this kind of influx of money would be, I think, a real benefit for the Commonwealth to address some of the effects we're seeing already, especially with sea level rise, considering the fact that Virginia is the second most vulnerable area of the country besides New Orleans for sea level rise. And so I understand where you guys are coming from. I also appreciate where my friend Chuck Ball is coming from. But I feel like it's necessary that we have an influx of cash, that we try to address this proactively. And I would hope it's the will of the committee that we do that.
Mr. Chairman, ready for a motion?
Ready for motion?
I move PDI.
A motion to PBI. A second?
Second.
All right, it does leave 2 minutes per side.
I'd like to take a break and everybody gets more pizza.
But we don't have to take it.
All right.
Here the motion, PBI, is, and a second, so any further discussion? All those in favor of passing the bill by indefinitely, please vote on the board. Bill to pass by, motion to pass by indefinitely, passes 4-1.
Okay.
You wanna hit your next bill while you're here?
Yes, we have some significant changes in terms of amendment in nature of substitute that was sent to the clerk. And then also, since that time, we have another amendment. Matt, can we send this down to the clerk?
Who wants to move the substitute first?
Yeah, so let's, yeah, motion to substitute. Second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Substitute for 4.
Thank you. So the proposed amendment would insert a line at line 14 after the word subsection B and is little I. It would cut everything after little I and then add furniture, clothes, children's products, and bedding. And then in line 38, cut the words where a child under 12 years of age. And that or afterwards.
floor is yours.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, on the substitute, line 14, after Romanet 1 in parentheses, before the word intended, we would insert furniture, clothes, children's products, and bedding. And then the amendment would strike everything beginning with the word intended to be worn, all the way through to little I on line 15.
Oh, actually, all the way through the end of line 16.
Okay, all the way through the rest of that paragraph, through use in a residence. And then on line 38 of the substitute, we would strike the words where a child under 12 years of age. And I think we might need to keep the word where.
We know that, keep that.
Keeping the amendment?
Yeah.
We would need to keep the word where, so after the word school, after the word where, we would strike a child under 12 years of age or.
So where a woman who is pregnant.
Yes, sir.
Or where a woman who is pregnant is pregnant, right? Or school,
Or
or
school.
where a woman who is pregnant. Right,
Or school, or where a woman who is pregnant.
right. So, this is legislation that, Mr. Chairman,
No, but let's go ahead and get this amendment.
Oh, sure.
So, we've adopted substitute, so let's move the amendment, have the motion, move it. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. So amended substitute is before us now. Delegate Mike, you have a question? All right, everybody know where we are? Anyone in the audience like to speak?
oh, can I speak to it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, this is a legislation that I've put forward a couple of years now with the firefighters, the International Association of Firefighters, and also the Virginia firefighters. Basically, flame retardants are one of the most common sources of toxic chemicals in our homes and in our lives. While they're originally designed to prevent products from catching on fire, flame retardants in upholstered furniture, carpeting, and children's products have been found to really be ineffective, unnecessary, and even harmful. One example is the toxic flame retardant chlorinated tris, which was banned from children's pajamas in 1977. But that same chemical is now shown in other equally dangerous but legal uses, including crib mattresses, nursing pillows that cradle vulnerable kids. Unfortunately, flame retardants don't stay in these products. These chemicals leach out and they get into people and pets. The very dust we sweep up from our floors contains toxic levels of flame retardants. These retardants leach out of products and accumulate in fatty tissue. It's a pervasive problem. And testing from the Centers for Disease Control found flame retardants in the bodies of more than 90% of Americans. Studies have also found that children are at even greater risk because they play on the floor and put their fingers in their mouths. And as a result, they have 2 to 5 times higher levels of these chemicals than their parents. Once in their bodies, they do damage. Studies have linked flame retardants to a host of biological and neurophysical ailments, including endocrine disruption, decreased fertility, lower birth weights, and developmental and cognitive problems in the next generation. They've also, and this is why I'm putting it forward, most importantly, put firefighters at higher risk for certain cancers and other serious health effects. For example, the risk of mesothelioma in firefighters is over twice that of the general population, while the risk for esophageal cancer is 62%. Basically, the toxic smoke created by the burning of these chemicals can even penetrate protective gear. To make matters worse, flame retardants added to polyurethane foam products have been shown to be ineffective in fire protection. If these flame retardants are ineffective, unnecessary, and even harmful, why do we include them in our products? Basically, back in 1975, California adopted a flammability standard that required that these products resist an open flame. Manufacturers added these chemicals to comply with California's standard. These policies were enacted before scientists were able to determine the effects of these chemicals on health. In 2013, the California standard was changed so that added flame retardants were no longer necessary. Therefore, we no longer need to let California drive the safety standards of Virginia products. This legislation would prohibit the use of toxic flame retardants in the products listed, furniture, clothing, children's bedding products, and because safer alternatives exist that still meet fire safety standards. And this bill will assure Virginian consumers that products sold in the Commonwealth are free of the worst of these chemicals to protect the health of both firefighters and kids. Now, Mr. Chairman, the fact is that what the firefighters in Virginia are concerned about is that with these products being sold in Virginia, it's okay if they're manufactured, but if they're sold in Virginia, and they're in the home, and when you have a fire, it creates this toxic soup, this carcinogenic soup that firefighters sometimes have to go into. And we're trying to avoid that for firefighters. And that's what essentially the bill is trying to do, is we have the science now. We know what the standards are. We know that we don't need to be following California standards anymore. And we should update what Virginia's standards are. So after working last year with several folks, we took out exemptions for all terrain vehicles. We removed the manufacturing of these products from the ban, so it only applies to the sale of products with these chemicals. It no longer creates the Virginia Product Safety Fund, which we had before. And it moves the oversight to the Virginia Department of Health bedding and upholstered furniture program. And so we feel like we've addressed a lot of the concerns that have been raised over the years. And also addressed some of the concerns that an expert in the field, actually Delegate Adams, who's taught classes on this, raised with me earlier. And so I feel that the time is now to actually protect folks, and more importantly, protect firefighters who are, have been trying to push this legislation for years.
I appreciate you bringing it forward. Any questions in favor? Anyone in the audience like to speak in favor of House Bill 2394 as a substitute, please come forward. State your name.
It was interesting, the firefighters were supposed to be here. If they'd known about the pizza, I'm sure they would have been.
They'd already eaten.
Well, they already ate.
Anyone in opposition like this?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just for, I'm going to cite some of this. I'm Brett Vassian, the president of the Virginia Manufacturers Association, also president of the Virginia Chemistry Council. With me today, I have a representative of the American Chemistry Council as an expert, but I also have with me Dr. Tom Osmitz with Science Strategies from Charlottesville. He's a member of the American Board of Toxicology and he's also a European registered toxicologist. So I've not had the benefit of seeing the substitute. I have no idea what it says. I'm really just going to speak to the underlying bill and to the state-based regulations of what the federal government regulates, and I hope that helps. So what you're really dealing with here are a couple of policy issues that I think are important not to overlook. Presupposed in all of this legislation over the last 3 years is that exposure equals risk equals toxicity. And I think Dr. Osmitz can talk about those differences in just exposure. Assuming that just because you're exposed, you have a higher risk of any of these, there are, and he can address this, but the Consumer Product Safety Commission regulates this, the Environmental Protection Agency regulates this. We've got the European standards regulate this, the European Chemical Bureau in 2008, and some of these chemicals actually said there is at present no need for further information and or testing and no need for risk reduction measures beyond those which are already applied. It goes on and on and on that all of these particular chemicals in that section that enumerates all those scary acronyms are all regulated at the federal level, and in particular the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission and the EPA. And right now, none of these are banned. Virginia, and I think Delegate Lopez and I agree on one thing, that there is no need to follow California. We just have a different point of view. We would like to have a standardized set of national regulations that we follow, and we do think that just a couple of years ago, the Frank-Lautenberg Chemical Safety Act started that process at the national level. First time in 30 years of reevaluating all of the chemicals in their application. So at the larger level, that's what you're being asked to do, is to replace your judgment in a 30-second hearing seeing a bill with that of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission and the EPA. and European standards. I don't think that that's where you want to go. I will say this, the second thing that's important is that, and again, I don't have the benefit of the substitute, but one of the troubling things in the original bill is, in Virginia, we don't ban the manufacturing of anything unless it's an illegal substance. And it banned the manufacturing of those products. It also had a product recall component. We don't do product recalls at the state level. That would be an unprecedented overreach. And those things absolutely trouble us, that would be in there. And then, of course, you've got the fund, and that's just a financial issue for you all to deal with. But we just wanted to be able to register that this isn't, and again, I'm speaking to the original bill, this isn't as simple as just complying with California or exceeding California. This is just replacing the federal government. And that's not something Virginia generally does, and it does put us at a real disadvantage in the marketplace. I'm not gonna cite, I handed this out for you in the right-hand column. I'm not gonna hide, in the interest of time, and I know it's late, I'm not going to cite the safety piece of this, but this bill could put some products that are manufactured actually at risk of being in compliance with federal law because of their fire retardant requirements. But the bottom line is fire retardants save lives. All that data is clear. I have suggested to Delegate Lopez over the years, and I think just lately this session, that if we wanted to come together to help firefighters and improve perhaps their respirator apparatus or the funding of respirators, so when they do go into buildings, that they have better control, that would absolutely be something that we would be in favor of helping on. But this is not the way to get circuitously there. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, if anybody, I am not a toxicologist, and don't pretend to be one on TV, but Dr. Osmonds is, if you do have questions about the toxicology issues.
Sure, I'd be glad to answer any questions, just kind of highlight a couple of things that I saw when looking at the bill. And I do respect Representative Delegate Lopez's desire to improve public health and certainly take care of the firefighters. We share that. And I'm a toxicologist, I went into the field to do that, so I know we share it. The question is how best to do it. I think the issue that always troubled me about a legislation like this is it kind of puts all chemicals on the same playing field. These are all very different molecules. Some of them have been considered to be carcinogens, others haven't. TCPP is one that's in here. I don't want to use too many alphabets, but it's not considered to be a carcinogen, a mutagen, reproductive toxin, neurotoxic. Some of the other chemicals are. So those should be singled out and prioritized for looking at specifically with regard to their potential risks. And that gets to the whole point about risk. I think if there's limited resources and limited regulatory ability, I would focus on the uses and the chemicals that have the most potential risk. Some of them probably do, and I think we would agree that some probably are worth looking at. Some, I would assure you, probably aren't. But to put it blanketly like this, I think probably implicates a lot of chemicals that can be used safely and potentially have benefit. But also, it takes resources and focus away some of those which, when looked at carefully, may deserve to be regulated. Now, again, the policy issues of how the state deals with it is not of my concern, but as a scientist, that's what I would recommend, and I think that's where the risk comes in. It allows you to focus on the ones that are biggest concern, the ones that can have the most potential to improve public health.
Mr. Chair.
No, you're out.
I'm sorry, what is your name again?
Brett Bassett.
Mr. Best, could you tell me again what you said about the U.S. Consumer Product Safety?
Yeah, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, they're actually evaluating 4 categories of consumer products, as we've outlined in this. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Children's products, furniture, mattresses, and the casings around some electronics, because some of these chemicals are actually used in that. I know we're not talking about that in this bill, but we wanted you to know that those are the 4 areas they're looking at. And that's under the Federal Hazardous Substance Act. I do not have an update for you to let you know where is an EPA or the commission in that process. And admittedly, it is a slow process. We talked about that last year in nauseating detail,
So
but it is in process.
So perhaps somebody can, sorry. My understanding is that that agency has put out a statement that wants to, that just says that there are toxic flame retardants that need to be removed. Now, one of the suggestions I had made to Delegate Lopez was to not list the name of the chemicals, but rather have a panel, have the ability to navigate what is in it. But I think that there, and sir, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think there is ample evidence to show that, this issue has been argued very competently on both sides. And that flame retardants, while, are helpful, are also, not helpful and toxic and deadly. And, I believe that there was a study, that was published in, the Journal of Science and Technology in 2014 that demonstrated that in California, which is where a lot of this started, Californians exposed to, these toxic, chemicals had higher incidence of, biomarkers and prevalence of, cancer. So, I just, I'm a little concerned, Mr. Chair, with the sort of global dismissal of this bill, in that, yes, there are things done at the federal level. There are many states, almost 25, so almost half of the US, that have safer state, policies that really look at, what we could be doing better. I don't know that any one of us would like to lose somebody that we care about to a cancer that we know that we could make some small initiatives towards preventing. And there is definitely research that shows a correlation between toxic flame retardants and cancer. And please correct me if I'm wrong.
Chairman, Delegate, I think I'm familiar with the study, but one of the important things to look at is, this is one of the issues that I think I addressed with the CPSC, there are certain categories of flame retardants, the older flame retardants, which were produced and sold before there were some of the more sophisticated toxicology tests and more, before many of the companies got more sophisticated in how they test chemicals. Most of the chemicals I think you're talking about in that California study are no longer in use. I think voluntarily they're not being used anymore. And that's an example of why, if we took a look at the different categories in here, and there's about 3 different classes of chemicals here, you'll see there's very big differences between the toxicity, 1, and 2, the potential to cause harm in humans. So that's, I think, I'm agreeing with you, there's maybe certain molecules that do deserve that treatment, and I think a reasonable approach based on hazard and risk and health, divide that into the categories, and then take action for the appropriate ones. But as I mentioned, TCPP is an example where there's no animal studies showing anything harmful, and the human studies as well. So that's something that I think it wouldn't make sense to happen here, where there may be some other ones where we would agree on.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Lopez.
I appreciate the comments from everyone. As we mentioned, and I apologize to folks who hadn't seen the substitute amendment, and the nature of a substitute. The bill before us removed manufacturing of these products from the ban. So there's no talk of manufacturing, it's only about sale of products with these chemicals. It no longer creates the Virginia Product Safety Fund. And so just want to address that because that was brought up in the comments. And then also, we move everything to the Virginia Department of Health's bedding and upholstered furniture program for oversight. There are, the thing is, we can't just talk about the one chemical in the list in section B that it might have some question about. The other chemicals listed are carcinogenic. They are a problem. We don't have language in the code that addresses it. This bill addresses it. And there are fire retardants over time that are less carcinogenic, that are not a problem, and that the IAFFF, the International Association of Firefighters, and firefighters in Virginia work with, and appreciate having. But the fact is that we still have the problem of some of these products being sold in Virginia and being a problem in the Commonwealth. So if we have the ability to just do something to help save just a few folks and make it less of a toxic environment, I think I would appreciate the committee actually addressing and voting to pass the bill.
Delegate Fair.
Mr. Chairman, Christmas Eve, when I was 9 or 10 years old, I don't remember, I think I was 9 years old, Christmas Eve, my sister lit a candle with a stick match, and the head of that candle dropped into the sofa in our living room. Nobody knew it, she shook it, and it flopped off. That sofa, and she went to light candles other places. My mom was in the kitchen doing some things, and Next thing we know, our living room was on fire. And that sofa, we put fire extinguishers on it. My dad just happened to be there and was able to get that sofa out of the house, but it would not go out. We put fire extinguishers on it, we put water on it, we did everything. It was in the yard, and we soaked it down with garden hose, and the next day, the cushions, you know, the removable cushions, we soaked it down with water hose. The next day, it was just squares in the yard where those cushions burn up, and we soaked it down with water hose. So I can tell you what'll happen in that situation, if we just hadn't been lucky enough to be there and to see what was going on when it first happened. So I'm ready to make a motion at the proper time.
I think it's proper time now.
Move to, lay it on the table.
Motion laid on the table, second, move that they go ahead and vote. Bill is laid on the table, I vote 4-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. All right, do you have any other patrons in the room? Actually, Nathan here. Delegate Peace asked me to deliver his bill in his stead. He's chairing appropriations, so, and to be quite frank with you, I haven't had a chance to look at it. Pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah, really. Exactly like this.
What's the difference?
Right.
There is a substitute, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Delegate Ferris, you have a bill just like this?
I had a bill very much like this. It dealt with the Department of Forestry, in Maddox County. And what this does is it, of course, in a lot of places in the country where these, state forestry act, there are restricted easements to property. And so the deed calls for the easement going to the property to be along a road.
Motion substitute second. All in favor say aye. Substitute
It goes along, you know, the deed calls for it to go along an old road or
Oh, yes.
whatever. And
Yes.
so what happens is that, when the utility companies want to, get an easement to, bury utilities, it's a question about who can provide that easement. And so this just clarifies this, in New Kent County, to John D. Tolley and Laura L. Tolley from the New Kent Forestry Center, that allows them, gives them a 50-foot long, existing road to, use for utilities and ingress and egress to Route 60.
My understanding the department has,
Absolutely,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Delegate Ferris described it very well. This is we're trying to be good neighbors to folks who have been good neighbors to us. No impact to the state.
okay, move to report.
Second.
Motion to report second, House Bill 2016. No discussion, all those in favor vote on the report. All right. Delegate Ferris, you want to do yours, man?
Yes, sir.
Bill report 7-0. House Bill 2755.
Mr. Chairman, I think most of us here are, familiar with conservation easements. I'm not sure when, but sometime or another the legislature required localities to, come up with a comprehensive plan. And in our, in the agreements that dealt with the conservation easements, there was an agreement that these conservation easements would follow the comprehensive plan. For where the real property is located. Well, the problem is that a lot of the properties that want to be, put in these conservation easements are in growth areas. And in order to save these family farms, they need to do these conservation easements, versus, the battle of being, developed, to keep from being developed. But some of the, easement holders are scared to hold these easements in properties that have been deemed high growth areas. And, I got one situation in my district that 10 years ago, when the real estate market was really good, and, there was a gentleman in the community that had moved there, and a certain part of Buckingham County, seemed to be growing very fast because of some businesses he put there and some things he was doing. Since then, and with the, economy failing, that is certainly not a high growth area anymore, but it still is showing in the comprehensive plan for Buckingham County as a high growth area. This is a double-edged sword, and I'll admit to that, because, we don't wanna put conservation easements in places that really should be high growth areas that the counties have provided utilities for. So, it'd be very amicable to hear if there's anybody opposed or supports this legislation that might have any ideas to that.
I'd just make a comment myself that I agree with you in that it shouldn't be a landowner's bad luck to happen to be, if they've been there, property's been there a long time and it ends up in a growth area, that they couldn't protect their property just because it happens to be close to growth area, which kinda goes against the whole point of conservation easement anyway. So I agree.
Some of the points you said.
I know just enough land use law to be dangerous. And the most important thing I know about land use law is to call a land use lawyer. I'm concerned that there could be some unintended consequences of exempting entire pieces of property from a locality's well thought out comprehensive plan. I guess my question for the patron isn't the landowner's remedy to go to the local body and say, I need you to review the plan here? Don't they have the ability to do that?
Mr. Chairman, I would say they do. Sometimes they're met with resistance because it changes the tax structure of that property. And so that's,
Well, all conservation easements have that problem, right?
certainly, but one that is in a high growth area could be taxed really strong, because of its, value of development.
Mr. Chairman, so.
Doug, someone?
And your comment about the bad luck of a property owner is well taken, although, we all know the situation, down zoning and up zoning, and people who got a piece of property that were affected by zoning, they may even have rights there. I'll speak for myself. I don't know enough about, and I wish there was someone here either from the AG's office or who could school us a little more on what this could do to a locality's well thought out comprehensive plan. Us here in Richmond telling localities, your comprehensive plans are out the window. Makes me a little nervous.
Delegate Ferris?
Mr. Chairman, I will say that, under the acts of conservation easement, the localities still have the same ability of take for public good and, for public utility that they had before. But the conservation easement does not affect that, for public good, as it, has. I mean, as some people think it can. The natural gas pipelines are a prime example of that. They've been able to put the gas lines they have right-of-ways through these conservation easements. However, they have had, Dominion has had to purchase, other properties and put other properties in conservation easements to, replace it to seven or eight fold, I think, Mr. Chairman. It is possible.
What if it was a property that was located, in a growth area, designated growth area? And I know this because I know in Halifax, for example, they have a growth area, it's just a circle. It wasn't very well defined, it's in a circle. And I had a piece of property in that growth zone. And so the easement would have to be, so if you're in the growth zone, can the county sign off on it, give it a blessing and allow it to go through?
I think they can. How many, zoning designations is it? Is there high growth and growth and what are they?
Frankly, I think every jurisdiction's different. Which is one of the reasons I've got concerns.
I guess my question is if you added language or took whatever to get to the result of allowing the locality to sign off on it, if it was in a zone that is identified as a growth area to allow it versus just saying you can't do it if you're in a growth area.
I don't know the answer. I'm like, Delegate Sullivan, Mr. Chairman, I'm smart enough to know that sometimes you need to hire a good attorney.
Unlike this one at this table. Is that what you're saying, though?
Anyone in the audience like to speak in favor of this bill? Anyone in the audience like to speak in opposition to this bill? Anyone in the audience want more pizza?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Delegate
question
Sullivan.
for the patron. Delegate Ferris, Chairman's not gonna let me suggest that we put this off at all. But I'm just wondering whether this is something that needs a little more, coordinating, or, not that you haven't thought it through, but, it's a little more confirmation, I guess is the word at least I would look for, that this wouldn't have some unintended consequences for localities out there.
What if we,
Mr. Chairman, let me say this. I think you understand that the conservation easement program is very special to me and dear to my heart. And I'll admit that I don't know all the answers. I'd ask that we allow this bill to go forward with it, good faith, that the committee, understands that if we don't come to a good understanding of what could happen, what the consequences are, that we put this off for another year. I might be back. We work on it then.
I was gonna suggest that report, and if you can get it worked on before full committee. Do you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my name is Chris McDonald. I represent the Virginia Association of Counties. I'm not our land use expert or our planning expert, but we'd be happy to work with the delegate on this. Didn't want to stand up in opposition or in support of this bill until we'd actually worked out or kind of addressed this issue with the delegate. So we appreciate his concerns. We'd be happy to work with him through the duration of this session or in the off season, whatever works best for him.
I think that'd be very helpful. So do we have a motion to report or not?
I move to report.
Motion to report. No second? Second. And with the understanding.
Sure.
So can you finish that sentence? The understanding that what?
Good question. So, that the delegate will work to answer the questions that we have asked here, to the satisfaction of the full committee. And then if he cannot, he'll, I'm
Okay,
making a long motion.
So Delegate Ferris understands that if I vote yes to report, that doesn't mean I'm gonna vote yes.
I think
this
he's
week.
well aware of that.
Well,
Feel like a plum.
with Pedro having any problems, if we threw up a little red light to alert people to look at this.
I think that'd probably be pretty smart. I've done that a time or two tonight.
All right,
Yeah.
I've got permission.
All right.
Yeah.
He won't beat you up.
It's not too many of them.
That's right.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Then thank you, Doug.
Yes, sir.
All right, motion is to report. Vote on board. vote no?
Yeah.
All right, motion is to report, it's 5-2. Bill,
Thank y'all.
I mean, vote to report is 5-2.
Hope you come.
No, I agree. There was two people here and they said, we don't know how we want to testify. They went over to the
Mr. Chairman, while we're in the lull here, I want you to know particularly, but everyone else that, I made clear to Chairman Hugo and the other subcommittee, just when we just finished, I was aware there was pizza down here. He had no pizza up there.
Well, we got some leftovers, I might get on his good side there.
Delegate Evans has a bill, I can't find it, here it is, 2341.
So, first of all, is the chairman aware? He's on, it's my bill and his left.
He was in that committee that
He was upstairs,
downstairs.
Can you maybe
I'm sorry, downstairs.
buzz him?
I do not know where he went, he did leave.
Cause that's, it's the first one on
Oh,
the.
that's very good.
Delegate Evans.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there's a substitute.
I move the substitute. What's that? I can't.
One substitute.
Okay. It's been a long day, I know. Here we go. Okay, Mr. Chairman, basically this bill allows the Society of American Foresters to certify the credentials of the university program as meeting their forester standards before allowing a graduate of the program to call themselves a forester. And I know we have the forest department here. I would like to maybe talk to Genesis of the bill. This was a bill brought to me by them.
Okay, Delegate Evans, you call somebody to speak on the bill?
I think the forester, the state
Please give
forester.
me the
Mr. Chairman, delegates, Rob Farrell, State Forester, Virginia Department of Forestry. The current legislation designates who can call themselves a forester based on where they went to school. We would like to broaden that language to allow for an individual who went to a school that is not currently accredited to apply to the Society of American Foresters, that is who accredits the universities, to have their coursework accredited as qualifying as being called a forester. So we're trying to take the language and have it apply to the person's coursework rather than just to where they went to school. So it allows an opportunity for someone, one example we hired a very competent individual from Nepal who practiced forestry in Nepal, went to the university in Nepal, is a very qualified individual. We took his transcript, sent them to the Society of American Foresters. They said, yes, this individual qualifies as a forester. We in Virginia cannot call him a forester. We call him a natural resource specialist, even though he does the same work as our foresters. We would like to be able to title him as a forester and to provide that same opportunity to others who went to schools that aren't specifically accredited.
Any questions from the committee?
Rob, is any of these courses offered online anywhere now?
No, well, good and bad. It is hard to learn forestry online. There are, sometimes you just gotta go out there and
Sure.
measure that tree. So there is a concern within the forestry community that this would dilute who can be a forester. So to partially address that concern, we have added the substitute language that the state forester, the person who holds my position, would still be qualified under the existing language of having gone to an accredited university, and that addressed the concerns of the constituents of our forestry community.
Mr. Chair,
Look at that.
question about, is there a forester shortage? I mean, I don't know what is precipitating this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Delegate, one of the issues we are facing is people are choosing not to go and become professional foresters. They're ecologists, forest ecologists, natural resource managers. So the forestry programs have a declining enrollment, whereas some other programs have a increasing enrollment. So this will help us with that down the road to be able to hire good people and put them in these roles.
Anybody else?
I had
Go
a
ahead.
follow-up question.
Okay.
And this may be an odd question, but is there also a corresponding decrease in forests?
There is we are losing forest land on average since about the 1970s. So the loss of forest land to development is an issue that is going on at the same time.
So then the last question, Mr. Chair. The relationship between foresters and forests, what you're saying is that there's a real need to have more, credentialed foresters that meet the criteria that are broader than it used to be, I guess is.
There are,
the need.
there are additional opportunities for foresters out there beyond just these standard forest production foresters. There's a lot of water values and land conservation values now, so having a broader knowledge base amongst our foresters is a good thing.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead first. Good question.
Mr. Chairman, my son is in a, for Rob, my son is in a program at Virginia Tech, and it's a 2-year program, and there's some, they have a forest program there too. Would that a 2-year, just a 2-year program? For those kids, do you know if those kids, eligible to be foresters when they get out of that forest program or not?
No, I apologize, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of that. Through the College of Natural Resources?
No, it's College of Agriculture.
Ag-
It's the ag tech program, and they have some classes.
So I do not believe they would be able to be accredited unless they had taken all of the coursework associated with being a forester.
I just was curious if you knew what the story was, would that help some of these kids?
I think you'd have to change the, Mr. Chairman, Martha Moore, Virginia Farm Bureau, I think you'd have to change the curriculum with regards to the intent of that program is more of, from that perspective, technicians as opposed to this. I'm not sure they have some of the underlying classes. However, we would be happy to reach out to Dr. Wittestoffer and Dr. Grant, the deans of the College of Ag and College of Forestry, and see if there is any kind of adaptability within that program.
Okay, does anybody want to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Paul Howell, Virginia Forestry Association. We have a lot of foresters who are members, and a lot of them work for the forest products industry and for the state and for wood suppliers and for doing the procurement for sawmills, and we are in support of this bill.
In the interest of time, if you just say, yes, we're in support, or support.
Sorry, Virginia Farm is in support.
Martha Moore, Farm Bureau, in support. Susan Seward, Virginia Forest Products Association, in support of the amended bill.
Beck Stanley, Agribusiness Council, we support.
Thank you very much. Anybody in opposition? Any further discussion?
Move to report.
Second.
As amended.
I've got a motion to report and a second, as amended. All in favor? Vote on your opposed. All opposed.
I guess I can vote on this.
You vote for yourself on election day?
Not at all.
All right, we do have that, with the exception of Delegate Ware's bill, we're done, but we're afraid he may be gone.
Take it up before the minute.
Big Ware's bill.
I guess-
Chairman, if it's the pleasure of the committee, I can present the bill.
Just
I
don't
think
lose
I
it.
would prefer
Don't
that
lose it.
I get that
Make
direction.
the chairman really mad at you.
I would prefer hearing that Delegate Ware.
I understand.
Mr. Chairman, I lost the bill.
Yeah. And I let him do it, so, I mean, he can hear it full, so that's not a big deal.